Today we're going to be talking about adding and subtracting real numbers. And to do this, first of all, we have to know what the term absolute value means. Absolute value is a number's distance from zero on the number line. So if you have a number line like so, and let's say we have 0 in the middle, here's positive 1, positive 2, positive 3, positive 4, and so on. And then negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, and it keeps going. If you want the absolute value of a number, and this is the symbol for absolute value, say, of negative 2 is that number's distance from 0 on the number line. So here's negative 2. How many spaces do you have to go to get to 0? Well, that would be 2. If you have the absolute value, say, of 3, how many spaces from 3 do you have to go to get to 0? And that would be 3. And one thing to keep in mind is absolute value is always positive. So that's something you should make sure that you have written down somewhere. Absolute value is always positive. If you have the absolute value of 0, how far is 0 from 0? Well, it's 0 spaces. You're already right there. Okay, so for instance, absolute value of 5 is 5. Absolute value of negative 7 is positive 7. Absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Now, if you have a negative sign in front of your absolute value symbols, that means to just carry the negative along and put it in front of your answer. The absolute value of 4 is 4, but we're carrying that negative sign along, so the entire answer is negative 4. Still, the absolute value of the 4 was positive, but it's saying put a negative in front of your answer. Okay, so now let's say we want to add numbers with the same sign. If two numbers have the same sign, just add their absolute values and attach the common sign. So for instance, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Add them and you get 7, but they're both negative, so put a negative in front. Negative 2 plus negative 8. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2, absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Add them and you get 10, but they're both negative, so put a negative in front. If you have something like 5 plus 7, don't fret over it. It's the same addition you've always known. Okay, absolute value of 5 is 5, absolute value of 7 is 7. Add them, you get 12. They're positive. You don't even have to go through that. You know 5 plus 7 is 12. Okay, so let's move on. Adding numbers with different signs. What we're going to do is find the difference of their absolute values and use the sign of the number with the greater absolute values. So let's see how this works. Absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Absolute value of 2 is 2. The difference between 8 and 2, in other words 8 minus 2, is 6. Which number is bigger, the 8 or the 2? Well, it's 8. Well, that goes with the number, well, that was, or which absolute value is bigger, 8 or 2? Well, that was 8. Well, that goes back to the problem that had a negative in front of it, so we make it negative. Okay, so let's do this next one. Absolute value of 5 is 5. Absolute value of negative 13 is 13. The difference between them is 8. So we want the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. Well, 13 is bigger, but that came from the absolute value of negative 13. So we make it a negative 8. Negative 7 plus 12. Absolute value of negative 7 is 7. Absolute value of 12 is 12. The difference between them is 5. So we want the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. Well, that would be 12. And so the absolute, then that was the absolute value of positive 12 that we took. So 5 is positive. You don't have to put a plus sign in front. If you want to, you can. It's not wrong. It's up to you. All right, so add or subtract. Negative 4 plus negative 7. Both of the signs are negative, so we're going to just take the absolute value of each number of 4 and 7, add them to get 11, and attach that common sign. It says do y plus negative 2 for y equal to 6. So we're going to substitute 6 in place of y. And we have 6 plus negative 2. The signs are different, so we're going to find the difference between the absolute values. Absolute value of 6 is 6. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Subtract them, and you get 4. Take the sign of the number with a bigger absolute value. Well, that came from positive 6, so the 4 remains positive. This one, negative 3/4 plus 1/4. What I always do when I add and subtract fractions, if we've got a negative involved, I always stick the negative in the numerator. It usually will make your life a lot easier. So our numerators are the same. I shouldn't have said, yes, numerator. Our denominators are the same. I'm sorry, our denominators are the same. So we're going to say negative 3 plus 1. Well, the signs are different. So absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Absolute value of 1 is 1. Subtract them, so we get 2. Take the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. That would come from negative 3. So we get negative 2/4. Now that can, of course, be reduced to negative 1/2. Okay, let's go on. Subtracting real numbers. The basic rule for subtracting numbers, signed numbers, is if you have your first number minus the second number, it's equal to the first number plus the opposite of the second number. So for instance, if I rewrite 7 minus 12, what we're going to do with all of these problems is rewrite them as addition problems. So we're going to say 7, that's our first number, plus, what is the opposite of 12? Well, it's negative 12. We know how to do that problem. 7 plus negative 12, we just did problems like that before. I bet we don't even have to go through all the absolute values. That would give us negative 5. Let's do the next one here. We're going to write down the first number, change the minus to plus, and take the opposite of the second number. Well, the opposite of negative 12 is positive 12. 5 plus 12 gives us 17. Next one, keep your first number. Change your minus to plus, and take the opposite of your second number. Opposite of 12 is negative 12. Negative 6 plus negative 12 is negative 18. Next, negative 12 minus 7. Keep your first number, change your minus to plus, take the opposite of the second number. So the opposite of 7 is negative 7. Negative 12 plus negative 7 is negative 19. Next, keep your first number in 3 minus negative 6. Change your minus to plus. Take the opposite of negative 6, which is positive 6. So we end up with 9. Really, whenever you see two negative signs together like this, minus and negative, think of it as being the same thing. All you're doing is taking these two negatives and making them a positive. Two negatives do make a positive. Okay? So now, this one. Negative 6.7 minus 4.1. Well, keep your first number. Negative 6.7. Change your minus to plus. The opposite of 4.1 is negative 4.1. Remember, the signs are the same, so we're just going to add the numbers. So we end up with 10.8. Really, we're adding the absolute values of the numbers and just put the negative sign, the common sign in front. 5 minus negative 4. Keep the first number, change the minus to plus, take the opposite of the second number, which is 4, and we get 9. Okay. Next one, z minus 2 and 7/10. We want to do this for z is equal to negative 2 and 3/5. So we have negative 2 and 3/5 minus 2 and 7/10. All right, now our denominators are not the same. What I would do in this case, because you've got a mixed number here, change them to improper fractions. Remember how we do that? We say 5 times 2 plus 3. So we end up, and keep that negative sign, by the way, in front. So we end up with negative 13/5. Over here, do the same thing, 10 times 2 plus 7. So we end up with minus 17 tenths. Okay, we need a common denominator, which would be 10. 5 goes into 10 twice. 2 times negative 13 is negative 26. And then negative 17, 17 tenths stays the same. Well, our denominators are the same, so let's add the numerators. So we keep the first numerator of negative 26, change the minus to plus, 17 becomes negative. So negative 26 plus negative 17. So that would end up with being negative 43 over 10. That can't be reduced. If you want to write it as a mixed number, you would write it as negative 4 and 3/10. Okay, last one. An iceberg extends 75 feet above the sea. The bottom of the iceberg is at an elevation of negative 247 feet. What is the height of the iceberg? So think of the sea being like so, and here is your iceberg starting at the bottom, and let's say it goes like this. Okay, here you're at negative 247 feet below the sea. Here you're at 0 because you're at sea level, and its high point right here extends to 75 feet. So how would we figure out the height of the iceberg? Well, from negative 247 to 0, that would give us, basically we're taking absolute values here. The absolute value of negative 247, how far is it from 0? Well, it's 247 feet. Okay, and then we have the absolute, then how far is 75 feet from 0? Well, absolute value of 75, you all know that, is 75 feet. So add them together, 247 and 75. Let's do this. Don't even need a calculator. 7 and 5 is 12, carry the 1. 1 and 4 is 5, 7 is 2. 1 and 4 is 5 and 7 is 12. So we get 322 feet total. 322 feet total for the height of that iceberg. So I thank you very much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.